So I always hate saying that a phone's all about the camera, because nowadays it seems like every phone is focused on the camera. But this is the Mi Note 10, and it's the first phone with a 108 megapixel camera. Okay, first of all, don't get all caught up in the hype of a camera being 108 megapixels. Megapixels aren't always better, especially when you subdivide on a sensor that's the same size. In fact, there's a reason why most cameras that do really well in low light have less megapixels. They are less subdivided on the same sensor. Now, when you put 100 megapixels on something like the Fuji GFX 100, which is a huge medium format camera, it's fine because you still get a lot of light information per diode on that sensor. But when you put 100 megapixels on a sensor that's 3/4 of an inch, you start to lose a lot of information. Now, don't get me wrong, 3/4 of an inch is huge for a smartphone sensor. In fact, that's the biggest smartphone sensor that we've seen so far. The Sony IMX586 48 megapixel sensor that's been in like every single smartphone this year is 1/2 an inch, so that's actually quite a bit larger. And even Huawei's Mate 30 Pro uses a smartphone sensor that's 0.65 inches, so this is even bigger than that. So past all that technical stuff, you're probably wondering how 108 megapixels actually looks on a smartphone. And I'm pretty mixed. So in absolutely perfect light, think midday in the middle of the summer, you can get some pretty cool shots. You can definitely zoom in a little bit further in the cropped mode than you could on a regular camera. But in pretty much anything besides absolutely perfect lighting, you're gonna just wanna use the binned 27 megapixel mode on this phone. I shot photos in perfect, medium, and bad lighting, and in almost every single situation, the regular 27 megapixel mode did a lot better than the 108 megapixel mode. Even sharpness and detail in perfect light looked better most of the time on the 27 megapixel mode. And that's because the camera is actually pixel binning. And what that means is it's taking groups of 4 pixels on the sensor and acting as if they're one giant pixel diode, taking in the light and then using that as a big pixel of information. When you subdivide those into 4 sections, you just get a lot less light information, and I don't really see a point of having a 108 megapixel camera on a smartphone unless you can make the sensor a lot bigger. But all right, let's move on because this phone clearly isn't all about the 108 megapixel camera. Below that sensor, you've got a 2x telephoto camera, and below that, you've got a 3.7x telephoto camera. Now, Xiaomi markets this as a 5 megapixel 5x optical zoom camera, but that's not the case. This is actually a 3.7x optical zoom on an 8 megapixel sensor that's just kind of cropped in to 5 megapixels to produce a 5 megapixel image. Now you're getting about the same reach as you would get on a 5x zoom with this mode, but they aren't the same thing. You're still getting the same distortion as you'd get on a 3.7x optical zoom. And they also printed 5x optical on the phone, so that's pretty misleading in my opinion. Below that, you've got an ultra-wide sensor, and then below that, you've got a dedicated macro sensor that's 2 megapixels. So it's clear that Xiaomi is really trying to make this phone a Swiss Army knife of cameras, and I feel like they've really done that here. Now, if we can move past all that technical stuff, the actual images that I got out of this phone were really good. I've always really enjoyed Xiaomi cameras because I feel like their color profile and contrast and sharpness is just a nice middle ground than what we see in smartphones today. Most phones currently are either over sharpened or have too much contrast and they just don't look realistic, but Xiaomi has really gone with a more subtle approach and it looks a little bit more like a Fujifilm camera. Portrait mode shots also looked pretty good. They did sharpen faces a little bit more than they would in normal shots, but overall I think they looked really nice. They had very good edge detection and color and sharpness were good. Now the other interesting thing about the Xiaomi Mi Note 10 is it's got a freaking huge battery. It's 5,260 milliamp hours, which is absolutely massive, especially when you compare it to how thin the device actually is. This phone looks pretty generic. It kind of just looks like a generic Honor phone to me, but it maintained the same footprint as most of the other phones that you'll find on the market right now, and the ability to put such a massive battery in a phone this thin is pretty insane. Also, it comes with a 30-watt charger, and that charger was able to charge this from 0 to 100% in just an hour and 6 minutes, which is really, really fast, especially when you consider how much power is actually in this battery. Now the phone's also got a 1080p AMOLED display and it looks really good. I've never really thought that you needed a 2K display in a phone, and when other manufacturers are using AMOLED displays and making their 1080p panels looking great, I think that Xiaomi's really hit the nail on this one as well. As for other specs, you've got 6 gigabytes of RAM, 128 gigabytes of UFS 2.1 storage, and the Snapdragon 730G. So no, there are a lot of flagship specs in this phone, but unfortunately the chipset is just not there. It's a gaming-oriented version of a mid-range chip from Qualcomm, and I mean, it was fine. I didn't have any performance issues with it during my entire time with the device. It just scored a little bit lower on benchmarks, but unless you really care about that, I don't think most people are going to notice. Also, it's a lot lower power, which is probably contributing to the really good battery life that I'm seeing in this phone. Other extras you've got are an in-screen fingerprint reader. It's a little bit bigger than it was last generation and 88% thinner. It's now 7 by 9 millimeters instead of 7 by 7 millimeters like the last generation. And you've also got a headphone jack and an IR blaster. And those are both really awesome to see. And I say this probably every time, but if a manufacturer can fit a 5,260 milliamp hour battery in this phone, this thin, and include a headphone jack, I mean, come on. Now, a lot of people really hate Xiaomi's UI, and it's not great. There's no app drawer, it's a really bubbly aesthetic, and it's okay. I mean, if you hate it, you can always throw a launcher on it, but I probably wouldn't use this stock. Also, this is MIUI 11, which is based on Android 9, and if you're shipping a phone at the end of 2019 when Android 10's been out for a while now, I don't think you really have that many excuses for not putting Android 10 on your phone. And Xiaomi is charging 550 euros for this phone. So that means that this phone is in direct competition with the OnePlus 7T. Now on the OnePlus 7T, you're getting the better Snapdragon 855 Plus, you're getting the better 90 Hz AMOLED display, you're getting a better UI, and on this phone, you're getting a more versatile set of cameras, and you're getting a headphone jack, and you're getting a much better battery. So honestly, if you're in the European market, it really just depends on what's important to you in a phone. Do you want a faster, more fluid display with a better UI, or do you want a bigger battery and more cameras? A lot of people might say a bigger battery and more cameras. So if that's your thing, this is a pretty decent device. But at the end of the day, the Mi Note 9 is all about that 108 megapixel camera. And I just don't think we're ready yet for super high resolution cameras in smartphones. We really need to make sensors bigger before we're able to ship phones with cameras like that. But I can't fault Xiaomi for pushing the boundaries of what's possible in a smartphone. If no one's gonna push those boundaries, we're never gonna get better cameras, we're never gonna get bigger sensors, and I feel like over time we'll eventually get bigger and bigger sensors to where this starts making sense. But for now, I just wanna say, don't fall into the hype from 108 megapixels. There's a reason that Google has stuck to 12 megapixels and now 16 for so freaking long. But that's been about it for the Xiaomi Mi Note 10. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. I'll be sure to answer them. Head over to the website. I've got a full written review of this phone with tons of photos, lots of photo samples if you want to actually see these pictures. And until next time, I've been David with Android Authority, and I'll catch you in the next video.